Hello, this is Sean from 300baud, and today I'd like to take a look at the Amiga 500, what you need to get started, and some nice upgrades you can do yourself. So the Amiga 500 is an all-in-one unit. Features a computer motherboard inside the case, along with a keyboard. This is actually a very popular design in the 80s and 90s. And it's a very nice design. The only thing you're missing really is a display. On the Amiga 500, you have the disk drive on the side. You can see it right here. I've got the power light and the drive light, so it lets me know when the drive is active. I've also got a decent keyboard, but not a great keyboard. This particular keyboard was made by Samsung. It's a little spongy feeling, and the keys kind of move around just a little bit, so you can type on it, although long typing will get a bit tiring, but it's okay. The Amiga 500 is really marketed towards a lot towards gaming, so the keyboard, you know, it works, but that's okay. And if we take a look at the back of the computer, we're going to find our mouse port and our joystick port here. For two-player games, you could actually have two joysticks hooked up, or you could even have two mice hooked up on the Amiga. The Amiga will actually support two mice at the same time. We've got our audio left-right jacks here. We have our disk drive port, so we can hook up an external floppy disk. We've got our serial port. I believe this would be used on your, can't remember if serial is used for the modem or the parallel port is used for the modem. I'm pretty sure serial, I can't remember. But anyhow, you can hook up your modems and your printers to the serial port and the parallel port. Here's our power port, so we can plug in our power supply. And this is our RGB port here for our monitor output. And we also have a mono output for composite video, so you can run it to a mono screen. It'll give you a very nice sharp image, but you only get one color. You don't get any colors. You get grayscale. But I kind of wish they would have made this a color input here. On this side, we've got our expansion port. So this is where we can add in like hard drives on the side, potentially accelerators, things like that. Things that go directly to the CPU. And on the bottom, we've got our trapdoor expansion. On the Amiga 500, the only expansion you could put, I believe, in a trapdoor is memory expansion. Although there is a PC card that's available as well, where you can actually run a 8088 PC on this trapdoor that'll pass through the Amiga and run as well. So there's probably a few things. I don't believe they have accelerator expansions that go in the trapdoor. It's primarily designed for memory. The Amiga 500, oftentimes you had these sidecars that would plug into the side of the computer. It could contain your hard drive, accelerator, or other things on the side, which is pretty nice. We can take a look at the inside of the Amiga 500, see what we've got going on inside. There we go. Here's our keyboard. I can just lift this up and out. Kind of lifts out of the way. There we go. So here's our basic Amiga 500. I believe this is revision 5. It says A500N. I think this is the 5th revision they made. I believe they had 6 revisions, but I believe this is the 5. We've got our floppy drive on the side. This one still works. A lot of people will put Gotek drives in there because their floppies no longer function, but I kind of like having an actual floppy drive on my Amiga. We've got, down along here, this is our RAM. This system came built in with 512 kilobytes of RAM, a half a megabyte. You'll also notice it has spacers where you could have put additional RAM, but like I said, I get into more detail on this computer on the expansion that I did with the Terrible Fire. So if you're interested in taking a look at that, take a look at my earlier video. But I did put a 512 kilobyte expansion through the trapdoor memory expansion slot and made some modifications so that the 1 megabyte Agnes can read all of this as chip RAM. And then the processor, which is built in here, this is an add-on. This is a Terrible Fire add-on. This simply slots on top of your 68K processor slot, which is right there. And then the Terrible Fire sits on top of this adapter. And then we've got our 030 processor here. I believe this one is a 50 megahertz 030 on this board. Now, this particular board does not have the option for a FPU. If you get the slightly older version of the Terrible Fire, this is a Terrible Fire 536, they had one revision prior to this that gave you less RAM, but it did have the ability to add an FPU. So the FPU would come in handy for CAD applications and things like that, scenery generators, 3D modeling applications. I did do a speed comparison between this accelerator running in my Amiga 2000 versus the GVP accelerator, and did find that the GVP accelerator outperformed this accelerator. This one does have 64 megabytes of RAM, which is way more RAM than what you would need for a typical Amiga 500. Usually with the Amiga 500, if you have 1 megabyte, it's pretty much going to play any video game. But if you want to add a hard drive and capabilities to do things with a hard drive, then you'll want more RAM. I would say a system with 8 megabytes is probably more than what you'll need. This system also has the 3.1 ROMs installed, so that gives it a little bit of a boost there as far as I can load Amiga DOS 3.1 on this system and Amiga DOS 3.5. One thing you'll notice about this system is the code name is B52 Rock Lobster. So Amigas back in the day when they were designing them, they named them after B52 songs. So this is named Rock Lobster. Some of the additions that you would probably want, or some of the necessities for the Amiga 500, would be something like a joystick. If you want to play any games, definitely want a joystick. This particular one is a Wiko command control. I believe they called this one the bat handle. They had different style. They had a grip handle. They also had like a ball. This is the bat. We've got our monitor cable. This one actually has the Commodore part number on it. I've got a couple of these. I got 3 of these guys. This would hook up to the RGB port and then go to the monitor, and you can see it's looks like a 9-pin DIN on that one. You also want an audio cable. So this is just your generic RCA style left-right. And you also want to get a mouse or a trackball. In this case, I've got this 2-button trackball. This one looks like a no-name brand, just mouse for Amiga computers. I've got another one of these mice that's a 3-button mouse, and I believe the other one I have might even have a switch on the bottom so that you can use it with the Atari ST computers. So again, this just plugs into the standard 9-pin connector, joystick connector. And the last thing you'll want for the Amiga is some sort of a display. And here I've got the 1084S, which is a great monitor for the Amiga 500. And we'll take a better look at this. But this is the basics for what you need for the system. One other addition you could have for the Amiga 500 would be an external disk drive, especially if you plan on using Workbench, and then saving files out, like loading a word processor and saving files. It's really nice to have 2 floppies instead of just the 1. Before I forget, you might want a collection of floppy drive disks as well. So here I've got several of them. These are all backup copies. So I've got a few games here. New Zealand Story, which is a really nice arcade port. Technocop, P47, Test Drive, Deluxe Paint, I think, and Stunt Car Racer, just a few of them here. So this is the Commodore 1084S. This monitor has left-right speakers, so speakers on each side. It gives you a pretty decent screen. It's nothing fantastic, but for the Amiga 500, it's pretty good. You'll see we have our front panel here. This one has been Velcroed in place because the original snap had broken off, and I think that's going to be pretty common. So taking a look along the front, we've got our volume knob here. We've got hue, our color, contrast, brightness, and horizontal phase. At the back of the unit, we've got our power and our power input, a horizontal size adjustment, vertical size adjustment, vertical shift adjustment. We've got some indicators for our analog TTL, our RGB input. This is our switch for component video or RGB video, and this is says RG. Oh, jeepers! These don't make a lot of sense at all. We've got our CVBS and RGB and CVBS and LCA. So I do know that it'll allow you to change between a component video input and an RGB input, or it'll do like a digital RGB or an analog RGB. Here we've got our chroma and our chroma on the top, and this is probably our luma at the bottom. Then we've got our audio right and our audio left. So these little plug-ins here. This particular unit was manufactured in November of 1992. And it was made in Korea, and this is the 1084 SD2. So one of the later models for the Amiga 500, and it's pretty nice. So connecting the cables can be a little tricky when you don't see them, so I'm going to go ahead and connect those now before I spin the monitor around. This is a very thick cable that does not like to bend. And we've got our left channel, which will be gray, and our right channel, which will be red. And we've got our power. So I'm going to use my Ultimate Car book from about 1999, 2000 as a nice stand for my Amiga monitor. Here's my Amiga 500. Plug in the RGB. Our audio left, right. Here's my mouse, my joystick, and the last cable is my power. So I think I got everything hooked up on the Amiga, so next thing I want to do is start powering it on and see what we get. So we got power to the monitor, power to the computer. I think I might have my input set incorrectly, so I might have to adjust that. I'm going to restart the Amiga, make sure everything's going through. Yeah, my inputs are incorrect, so I got to adjust that. There we go. Now I got video. So I'm not sure why, but occasionally I'm like terrible fire when I turn on the computer. I need to do a control Amiga, restart the computer before it actually starts booting. And there we go. So I have this Amiga set up with an operating system, which is located here in Workbench. There's a 256 megabyte drive, which for the time would have been just enormous. On my Amiga partition, I've got about 105, 110 megabytes set for the OS, which is probably way more than what I need on the operating system. So I think I might change that, cut it back. And then I have a work directory here, and this one is completely empty. So the computer's in good working order. You can see I've got my 1 megabyte of graphics memory, and I've got my looks like almost 67 megabytes of other free memory, and nothing going on in the background. Why don't we load a game with the disk and see how that works. So here I got New Zealand story. I'm going to pop that in. So what happens here is I put my floppy in and it says DF0 and DOS. So it doesn't register a DOS on this floppy disk. That's because it's written in a non-standard format. So let me see what happens if I do a Control Amiga and reset it and see if I can get it to boot off the floppy. There we go. So my disk drive light is on. Don't know if I've got any sound on this one, but we'll turn it up. Don't seem to have any sound right now. So we've got the little demo in the beginning. Kind of cool to see, but these were crackers. So this was people, stealing the software illegally. So this makes for a really nice port in the original arcade. That's that.